Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant, and today I want to talk about Horizons and gameplay. So, Horizons brought some massive changes to Elite. Many of them are extremely positive, and it is my personal opinion that Elite is all the better for planetary landings, the SRV and surface bases. I don't want to talk about the pricing in this video, as I've mentioned it elsewhere. Suffice to say that the concept of value for money is subjective, and it's my own subjective opinion that the price of Horizons is pretty much okay. That said, a lot of people have brought up issues with gameplay, and these issues are very valid. The bulk of the points people seem to raise surround the issue of content. Now, content means a lot of different things to different people, and to be perfectly honest about it, the term is relatively new to gaming. No one complained about Mario or Sonic not having content after all, and I certainly never saw it used as a critique against Doom. But in hindsight, all three of those games are shallow in terms of content, so what makes them work so well? Well, I'll get to that in a moment. A more valid comparison to Elite Dangerous would perhaps be games of a similar ilk. Ultima Online then, yet another game that the phrase lack of content was never used with. And for direct comparisons, let's look at the original Elite and then Frontier Elite 2. I'd argue that Elite Dangerous perhaps has more to it, yet those original games were never derided for lack of content. And now, please keep in mind that there are of course further additions coming to Horizons, multi-crew, avatars and crafting, to name a few. This is also a form of content in that it is additional game mechanic systems. However, as I will talk about in a minute, and as others have already said many times, additional game mechanics don't necessarily add additional long-term content. I can't comment on what gameplay these things will bring, or the totality of what they offer Horizons, as obviously none of that has been released yet. So, what do people mean when they talk about content? Well, I'm sure there are a lot of different variations and thoughts on this, but in general, I suspect they are talking about the experience they get from the game, the value they receive in terms of enjoyment for the time they have invested. That's a pretty broad look at it, but to get more specific then, content is often associated with the modern MMO, and World of Warcraft is a great example of that. Here, the player is given objectives to achieve, or given items to earn or unlock. In this sense, content means something that is essentially physical in the virtual space. A quest given by an NPC, and a set of armor or a predetermined path to follow. Sometimes such content is scripted, and sometimes it is simply there as an unlock or otherwise available in the game. In essence, it's handcrafted materials, handcrafted aspects of the game for the player to participate in. Essentially then, it's gameplay for a different era to the aforementioned titles. So, does Elite Dangerous need more content or more handcrafted content in this regards? In my honest opinion, the answer to that is very simple. It's a resounding no. Now, before you close the video in frustration at what I'm saying here, please hear me out. I agree with the opinions that there are currently significant problems with the gameplay within Horizons, and to a broader extent, the main part of Elite as well. But it is my opinion that it is not down purely to a lack of content. The problem as I see it is that Elite, and Horizons especially, heavily rely on using game mechanics. In fact, I would go as far to say that in Horizons, game mechanics are masquerading as gameplay. And it is this which is causing people so much frustration. Let me explain what I mean. The SRV is a great example of this. The gameplay centered on the SRV is what I like to call fuel hunting. In very broad terms, the main purpose of the SRV is to locate objects. Those objects fall into two categories: reward-based objects and self-sustaining objects. Self-sustaining objects are fuel, ammo, and repair. So, at least 50% of the reason we drive the SRV is to find objects that allow us to continue driving the SRV. A typical game loop, but not a very interesting one if it isn't interacting with other game loops. Basically then, using the SRV scanner is a game mechanic. It isn't gameplay. This game mechanic only becomes interesting gameplay when it interacts with other interesting game mechanics. At the moment, the only other interesting SRV game mechanic is to locate reward-based objects, or so-called points of interest. However, these are currently neither rewarding nor incentivized. We do also have base assaults, but they are essentially self-contained and are potentially the most interesting use of the SRV we have currently. But bases are limited in size, scope and location. Planetary surfaces, on the other hand, open up the SRV to far more potential, which is where the points of interest come in. Now, to make the points of interest more incentivized, I'm not actually talking about the financial reward we get from them. Frontier don't actually need to go out there and place canisters in these points of interest filled with millions of credits. That would probably be more financially rewarding, but it wouldn't fix the fundamental problem. The problem is that points of interest contain no incentive, no gameplay that leaves a player feeling that they have achieved something, or at least it doesn't offer them a sense of purpose. And it is here where some people start to assume the issue is a lack of content. Now, my thoughts are that the lack of content is irrelevant, and it's actually the lack of game mechanic interaction that is the real problem. I'm no game designer and I'm no programmer, but in my mind this problem can be fixed without the creation of any additional assets or content. It simply requires linking together already established game mechanics. The game already features the ability to have chained missions, and the game also already features the ability to receive missions outside of the bulletin board. So, what would incentivize points of interest for me? Well, picture this. I'm driving along in my SRV and pick something up on the scanner. That gets my interest. What could it be? I spend the next few minutes trying to locate the object and discover that it's some debris of a shipwreck. I see an escape pod there, and I realise this is a great opportunity. I use the data scanner on the escape pod and then receive a mission. It tells me please deliver this escape pod to Beagle Landing in Acellus Primus. Okay, great, the dude inside is lost and needs help getting home. So I collect the escape pod and take it back to that specific station. So basically each escape pod could have a specific destination for it to be returned to. En route, I can decide to stop off and sell their pod on the black market instead and make myself a big chunk of money. If I do this, I get a reputation drop and soon earn myself a reputation as a people trafficker. If I do deliver the escape pod, however, to the correct location, I get a small amount of money along with another mission to discover what happened to his ship. Perhaps I need to locate the black box. Perhaps it's located in space, or maybe it's been scattered somewhere across the planet that I originally located the escape pod on. And then it can go on from there, one mission linking into another, missions that already exist in the game. Maybe instead of locating an escape pod, at the point of interest I found a crashed nav beacon, and when I locate it I scan it and get a mission telling me to inform the relevant authority. This unlocks a chain of missions. Or perhaps I find a mining farm and scan the area and get a mission telling me to destroy lawless sentries in the area that have been causing problems for the farm. As you can see, no additional content is added into the game for any of this. In fact, content, in the sense of having crafted stuff added to the game, really isn't needed. All that is needed is for the interesting interaction of existing game mechanics. This, in itself, becomes an incentive because it gives the player purpose. And then, beyond this, the more variations we have in points of interest and the more variations in mission objectives there are, then the number of possible variations in how these combine greatly increases by potential orders of magnitude. To some extent, we already have seen some of this in the game. The old unidentified signal sources are now not alone in space. Distress signals, for example, can provide for some interesting gameplays. Jump into one of these, and if you find a ship under attack by pirates, this can essentially offer a scenario. I found recently that if you kill the initial bunch of pirates, that a second wave appears, and if you kill them, then a third wave will arrive, and so on, until eventually an anaconda shows up. I made around 500,000 credits just doing a little scenario like this, but ultimately the ship that was in distress just sat there and didn't thank me nor offer a secondary mission, which would have given things a much greater sense of purpose. Now, this needn't be limited to planetary changes or planetary based points of interest, but can also be extended to every game mechanic in the game, from smuggling to trading, from bounty hunting to exploration. All that is needed is for these existing elements to link together in interesting ways. The interesting link of various game mechanics is what made those classic games stand out. Multiple simple game mechanics such as a maze, plus a timer, plus being chased can add up to a fun game. Like those classic games, Elite also has many interesting game mechanics. They merely need to be organised together in a way that leads to a cohesive gameplay. Elite doesn't need progression or scripted predetermined paths. It doesn't need content in the traditional sense. It isn't that type of game. It is a world within which you can lead your own life, but at the moment there is little incentive to encourage that, and there is little that leaves the player feeling they have achieved something. Achievements don't need to be a trophy. They don't need to be a tag or a pop-up message. They don't need to be sets of armour or weapon upgrades. An achievement merely needs to be something that leaves the player feeling that they have done something meaningful. Elite already has everything that is required to offer that. The problem is that it hasn't linked everything together just yet. Now, maybe this is far more difficult to actually implement than it is to just talk about, but I also think it's an answer to the statements and cries of lack of content. At the end of the day, I believe that this is a direction that Frontier are probably actually heading in. They're smart enough to realise that handcrafted content really isn't needed, and is a concept reserved for a specific type of game. Frontier are also good enough with procedural generation that they could create significant variations of simple missions and points of interest. When enough of these are able to link together in a multitude of different ways, there would be a lot of different gameplay with a variety of outcomes. And of course, with new additions like multi-crew, avatar creation, crafting and deployable fighters thrown into the mix, the amount of potential combinations jumps up hugely. The question remains though to see if Frontier manage to link these game mechanics together in an interesting way, and if they do, how long is it going to take them to do so? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm very much aware that this particular aspect of the gameplay is far from the only gameplay problems with Elite and Horizons, but it is the issue that I'm currently focusing on in this particular video. At the moment, what to do in Horizons is a burning question in many people's minds, and I don't think it's a difficult problem to address, but as I said, I'm not a developer or a designer, and I certainly don't know what hurdles Frontier have to overcome. But I do think Horizons has massive potential, and it's already a wonderful achievement. It's clear to see that the game is a work of passion for everyone at Frontier, and the amount of love that has gone into it is readily apparent. For me, and probably many others, it's more than just a game, and there's really not that many games out there, and indeed not that many works of entertainment at all that can make that type of claim. So at the end of the day, I've got nothing but respect for what Frontier have achieved here. And I for one am very happy with what Horizons offers at the moment, but like many, I want to see it allowing people to easier discover gameplay that gives them their own unique sense of purpose. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time. The early in-game implementations of ring systems that we saw in Alpha appeared to be carrying the game in the direction of the concept art, and we did indeed see quite a few improvements over the following months after Alpha, including the introduction of ice asteroids along with some fantastic fog effects. But since then, the ring systems have continued to decline in terms of visual variation and quality. I raised a question about this on the forums last year and did receive a few replies from Frontier.